I will call the remote hearing of the Environment and Natural Resources Finance and Policy Committee to order. Today is March 18th, 2021. This meeting is held in accordance with Rule 10.01, which was passed and allows for remote hearings. All remote hearings are recorded and live streamed by House Public Information. The clerk will take attendance by roll.
All right, Chair Hansen is present. Wozlowick, Amy.
Wozlowick, present.
Present. I think Representative Hansen is just logging in, so I'll come back.
Present.
Oh, there you go. Aiko and Patty.
Present.
Ackland, Susan.
Ackland, present.
Becker, Jeff.
Backer, present.
Becker, Finn, Jamie.
Present.
Eklund, Rob.
Present.
Fisher, Peter.
Fisher, present.
Green, Steve.
Present.
Igo, Spencer. Igo, Spencer.
Present.
Jordan, Sydney.
Present.
Keeler, Heather.
Present.
Lee, Fu.
Lee, present.
Lippert, Todd.
Present.
Lewick, Dale. Lewick, Dale. Morrison, Kelly.
Morrison, present.
Nelson, Nathan.
Nelson, present.
Tice, Tama.
Present.
One more time, Lewick, Dale. Quorum is present.
Quorum is present. The next item on the agenda are the minutes for Tuesday, March 16th, 2021. Representative Lee, have you looked at the minutes?
Mr. Chair, I have looked at the minutes and I move approval of the minutes.
Representative Lee moves the minutes for March 16th, 2021. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Members, we have 4 bills today. The first one up is House File 1989, Minnesota Zoological Garden funding provided by Representative Huot. We've allotted till about 1:30 for this bill. I will move that House File 1989 be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. Representative Huot, to your bill.
Thank you, Chair Hansen, and thank you, committee. It's great to be in front of you here. Today I'm presenting the budget for the Minnesota Zoo. As most of you know, the zoo did have some hiccups this year with COVID. 1/3 of the operating budget comes from the state. 2/3 come from the earned revenue that it gets from the gate, parking, the food, some of their retail, education, Zoomobile, and others. And all of those had to be closed or canceled this year. The zoo definitely has had a struggle, but they've made it through it once again. And I'm not going to take a lot of time going into this because I know that I have some great testifiers here from the zoo. And I believe they are here, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Frawley is one of them, and I would like him to take over at this point, and I'll come back at the end.
Director Frawley, welcome. State your name and who you're with for the record.
Mr. Chairman, John Frawley, Director of the Minnesota Zoo. Also with me today is Abigail Mosier, CFO of the Minnesota Zoo, and Missy McGrath, Legislative Director of the Minnesota Zoo.
Proceed.
Mr. Chair, first of all, I just want to thank you for letting us present the governor's recommendations for the Minnesota Zoo in the budget this year. Our mission at the Minnesota Zoo is to connect people and animals to the natural world to save wildlife. It's a 42-year-old zoo, and we've made a lot of investments and built a world-class zoo right here in Minnesota that I think we're all proud of. If you look at the slide, I think I'd kind of like to, we thank you for letting us testify again. We were here earlier for a quick meeting a while back. So I have some of those slides that we had to go through quickly before, but a reminder, as Rep. Huot said, we're a state zoo, historically approximately a $30 million budget, 1/3 of our operating coming from the state and 2/3, coming from earned revenue. In other words, we have to have a strong business model to run this zoo. And I think we do have a really strong business model. Unfortunately, that model closing in a pandemic flipped kind of upside down on the zoo and put a lot of pressure on the zoo. Without that 2/3, you see, we had to move quickly, and we've now over the last year, we have closed or limited gate capacity. Our revenue has gone away. Our food and beverage has been closed or very limited. Our retail as well. We've canceled most of all of our education programs, camps, animal encounters, shows, Zoomobiles. So a pretty dramatic cutback to our facility. Prior to this, prior to the pandemic and closing on March 14th, the zoo had probably some of the 3 strongest years of growth that the zoo has seen. So we were a very strong financial position and program position. But like other facing and public facing organizations, the zoo was traumatically affected. In reference, we also, as we moved into this pandemic, looking nationally at all the other zoos around the nation, 225 zoos that are accredited, a lot of those zoos around the country were qualified for payroll protection programs. And I think a lot of them now have received their second round of funding for payroll. The Minnesota Zoo was not qualified for any of this type of funding. So that's why it's important we have this relationship with our state. The closing on March 14th, just to kind of give you a little, recap of what has played out here at the zoo. We've obviously went right into our continuity of operations plan, safety first, safety for the guests and the staff. We also had to consider the safety for the animals. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that animals can also get COVID. And there's been examples around the country. We've fortunately not had those problems, but we had to prepare for those problems. We quickly analyzed our financial position after closing on March 14th. And, even with a lot of cost containment, we knew we had to build a model that would be able to get us through the months ahead. And so every financial model that we built for the zoo, it was inevitable that not only just suspending contracts and RFPs and pulling back spending, halting all of our major projects at the zoo was not going to be enough. So we are one of an organization that had to early and quickly go into cost containment with salaries, which meant layoffs for Minnesota Zoo staff. And over 125 positions were affected at the Minnesota Zoo. These are all passionate people that really did nothing wrong. We've continued to operate without those staff at a very bare bones operating level for the zoo throughout the entire year. It's been over 10 months that we've been living with these deep cuts to make it through this year and do our part. And it's obviously had a lot of wear and tear on the zoo, a lot of deferred maintenance, a lot of fatigue. But I got to give it a lot of credit to the staff that have stepped up and taken on the extra work to get through over the last year. So moving forward, we have a plan of recovery. Obviously, we've been working on this every day and how to reopen the resources over the next 2 years. In the governor's proposal, on top of our base budget, you'll see here, we have recommendations for this recovery plan for the zoo, this 2-year recovery, where we are looking to get support here in 21 for 1.59 million, and 22 for 5.96, and 23 for 3.94. This plan, the plan we have, this support would allow us to sustain the zoo and kind of work to recover as the vaccine unfolds and as our capacity is increased. It allows us to, bring back the programming that has been deeply cut, all of our education and all of our things that we're all familiar with, Zoomobiles and close encounters and summer camps and so forth, all have to be reimagined and brought back and recovered. And then most importantly, I think we need to get back to that 2/3 operating, that 1/3, 2/3 operating model. That's when the zoo is very efficient and effective. So to go into a little bit more detail of all of this, and as far as our budget requests, we have Abigail Moser, who was our CFO. I'm going to, Mr. Chair, hand it off to her for a little bit more explanation.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Mr. Chair, members, for the record, my name is Abigail Mosher. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at the Minnesota Zoo. As Director Frawley indicated, we've made significant operational changes to manage the dramatic reduction in earned revenue, and it will be complicated to unravel those operational changes and rebuild over the next couple of years. That's why being able to really fully reopen our gate to the public is just the first step in recovery. The zoo guest experience is currently a one-way loop for animal viewing with no animal encounters or shows, play areas, or on-site education or events. The governor's recommendation for the zoo recognizes that it will take a strategic approach to sequencing the return of programs and experiences in order to rebuild the broad scope of operations and programming back to pre-pandemic levels. And so as we talked about this as a management team, we thought, we're looking at the full range of everything that needs to come back. We'll bring you just one example within that full range, and that's the bird show. So as many of you know, we previously ran multiple shows per day inside during the winter and outside during the summer. That program, as the director said, was entirely shut down last spring. We laid off most of the staff and relocated the animal collection throughout the campus. So rebuilding involves significant investment well in advance of a revenue impact. We need to hire staff with specialized skills in a state system that currently is under a hiring freeze. It takes 4 to 6 months lead time to reassemble and train the animal collection. We need to work through deferred maintenance in the show areas. And then once the shows are finally up and running, then we start seeing a revenue impact. In this case, it's a free experience as part of the zoo. So that means, increased dwell time, which leads to more food, beverage, and gift purchases, sponsorship opportunities, and hopefully more membership. So this is just one of the many programs we need to figure out how to sequence and rebuild over the next couple of years. And so our financial model for recovery factors in the time and the resources it needs to do that across the wide range of programs that we have, with, again, the goal of returning to operations to pre-COVID level by next biennium. So moving to the next slide then, as I said, the governor's recommendation really reflects the gap between our projected revenues and expenses as we do that rebuilding over the course of the 22-23 biennium. It's based on a financial model for recovery that reflects that the speed of rebuilding is limited, of course, by the pandemic, but also the significant changes we've had to make to our operation over the last year. So in developing this financial model, we considered a lot of things. We considered predictions that it will take at least through this summer for the vaccine to be widely distributed through the population, industry trends that show that visitor serving organizations do not snap right back to 100% upon reopen due to behavior change, timeline for economic recovery, and other factors. Our own data, which of course we're monitoring as closely as ever. And then, as I said, the investment lead time and careful sequencing it's going to take to bring back all the various programs that together contributed to our revenue streams and what brings people to the zoo. So what you have on the slide is the assumptions we made about our major categories of revenue. And ultimately, the chart then shows kind of what that financial model says in terms of comparing our COVID trajectory to our pre-COVID trajectory and kind of showing how we build back over those years to our pre-COVID, pre-pandemic levels under the governor's recommendation. And so with that, I will turn it back to Director Frawley.
Director Frawley.
Mr. Chair, just to follow up on what Ms. Mosher presented, it's not enough just to reopen our gates. I think we'll need this funding to bring back all of these programs that Minnesota Zoo is known for. This slide I shared last time I was with the committee. It shows the scale and work of the Minnesota Zoo. It's an amazing zoo. It's world renowned, and it's, like I said, it's one of the 5th largest zoos in the country. And we're lucky that it's right here in Minnesota. As we know, people are going to want to be staying in the state more than ever, I think. And the fact that we've built this within the state and people can get here and get back home is a great asset. So just to kind of give you the scale of our zoo. And with that, Mr. Chair, I think over the next 2 years, Minnesotans, I'll end with a Q&A slide here, but over the next 2 years, Minnesotans are going to want to, get outside and visit our parks and trails, hunting and fishing, I think they'll definitely enjoy and need our world-class zoo to be there and be ready to do that and deliver that for them. So with that, Mr. Chair, I would be happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Members, any questions? Representative Ackland, and then Representative Heinzman, and then Representative Tice. Representative Ackland. Representative Heinzman, I think we'll go, I see she's dropped off. Representative Heinzman? Or Representative Ackland, are you there?
Yeah, I can't get my video to work, but you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Proceed.
I had one small question for Director Frawley. The zoo is great and we'll be so happy to see it come back. But I just had a question. During this pandemic, did you have a need to decrease the number of animals in the zoo during this pandemic?
Mr.
Director
Chair,
Frawley.
Mr. Chair, committee members, it's a very good question. We did actually disposition some animals to make it easier for the reduced staff to operate. So fortunately, we did not have to go deep into the animal collection, and the zoos work closely around the country. We're all connected and work and share resources, especially with animals, to lighten the load for some of our staff because of the reduced layoffs. We have reduced our collection slightly, but most of the collection is still intact. But thank you for that question.
Follow up, Representative Ackland.
No, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It might have been in the presentation and I just missed it, but I'm wondering if the director could remind us why we don't qualify for the, I believe it was PPP money that was available for a number of other zoos around the country, but not here in Minnesota.
Director Frawley.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I think I'll let our CFO, Ms. Mosier, has been working closely on that. Ask her to step in and give a more accurate answer.
Ms. Mosier.
Mr. Chair and members, the PPP loan program was written to not be available for public entities. So as a government entity, we did not qualify for that particular program.
Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wish there was another way that we could have accessed those dollars, but apparently the current public entity issue is a problem. So thank you.
Representative Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I've not always agreed with some of the dollar amounts for the zoo, but I certainly appreciate the zoo. And it really is sad because it's such a family place. And I know that Representative Huot's been working really hard on the zoo. And yeah, I'm feeling really bad because this is basically the same situation we're seeing across the state with a lot of our businesses. And it just really stinks that we have to call on them, their taxpayer dollars, to help out. And I think we just really need to push that. We need to open things up. We need to get Minnesota back working again so that families can have the money to go to. We just really need to push for that. And I'm really feeling sad for the zoo. And I hope things change soon. I hope that we can come and visit really soon with our families. So hang in there. I don't know what else to tell you. Take care.
Thank you.
Director Frawley.
Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you for that. And that's what we're going to do is we're taking it obviously one day at a time. And I think the key is we have a smart plan of recovery. And we know Minnesotans, we've been hearing a lot from Minnesotans, emails and phone calls and letters. And so we know the demand and we're also excited to bring back this resource. So thank you for that.
Any other questions? Director Frawley, I have a couple questions on some of the research. So you were doing, there was a lot of groundbreaking pollinator research. There was turtle research. There was a number of things that were funded. Did those activities stop? Are they on hold? Was there continued data collection occurring, or what's happened with that research?
Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you for that question. And once again, I'm going to applaud our staff at the zoo for stepping up with the limited resources, the budget freeze, the hiring freezes. Our conservation staff and our programs did move forward through the pandemic on all fronts, butterflies and mussels and turtles. And recently we just had a meeting with the DNR yesterday and others around the state regarding our recovering a bison herd here for Minnesota and tying it to our prairie restoration needs. And so the challenge obviously was more for them was the COVID restrictions and being able to not work the way they normally did work. So, but they did pivot, and those programs slowed down, but had some good milestones. We were able to release endangered species butterflies. We were able to do counts on turtles and road mortalities. You know, we were able to continue rearing and releasing mussels into some of our lakes. And the bison have had some great conservation planned breeding programs moving forward. So they did slow down and the work was harder, but the staff did step up and keep some of those programs moving. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And then a follow-up with the federal aid package that passed last week. I'm not asking about PPP loans, but is there the opportunity for any discretionary appropriations that are coming to the state from the federal government?
Mr. Chair, our team is exploring that in depth right now. So we are aware and looking at all the language and talking to MMB and others about our possibilities along that front. So I don't have any answers right now, but we are definitely following that closely.
We would be happy to partner with you in terms of making those asks. Members, any other questions? Representative Huot, any closing remarks?
Thank you, Chair Hansen. I want to thank the members of the zoo staff here for being here today. I can tell you, I knew nothing about zoos 3 years ago other than they had animals. And Director Frawley and his staff, I've never seen anybody more that we can trust with these state assets. And in this time that we're in right now, to pull us forward. Representative Tice, I get it, and I want the state to open too. It'll fix a lot of problems. So I think as we get more open, we're going to see this. And I can't think of anybody or any staff better to guide us in this direction to keep our zoo going and healthy. And as Chair Hansen said, there's more to the zoo than just animals. We're hearing all this research. We're the only ones with the real buffalo herd anywhere in the world. And that's pretty cool to have those bragging rights. So members, as you go through and look at your omnibus bill, I would really encourage you to help us out and keep our zoo going, because I think in no time we'll be back in good graces and everything will be good. And I also, Representative Crowley, I want you to know that I'm a man of faith and I'll be praying for that federal money to help you. So thank you.
I will renew my motion that House File 1989 be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. The bill is laid over. Next up, Representative Keeler, House File 2285, Science Museum of Minnesota funding provided. And we have about 20 minutes for this. Representative Keeler, would you like to move that House File 2285 be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill?
I would, Mr. Chair.
Representative Keeler moves. There is also a small technical amendment on page 1.6. We had a transposed number. Is that correct, Representative Keeler?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Instead of 3.978, it actually needs to read 3.798. Again, it was just numbers transposed as we were working to get this together.
Representative Keeler, would you move the technical oral amendment to get the bill in the correct form?
I would, Mr. Chair.
Representative Keeler moves the technical amendment. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, the amendment is adopted. Representative Keeler to the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'm really excited to talk about House File 2285. Earlier, we heard from the Science Museum of Minnesota, and I know that it's a place that my family loves. We actually went there a couple weekends ago, and there's not many places across the state that my 4-year-old can be super engaged along with my teenagers and myself as an adult. There's different areas like the dinosaurs, which I think we all love. There's sports areas, but also there's a phenomenal piece of culture there and history. And what I want to say is this is one of the areas in Minnesota that impacts the entire state. The work that they do out in the schools and across the counties is something that we just can't afford to lose. The nice thing about the Science Museum is it plants seeds for future professions. It plants seeds for our next generation, and that's so important. And it's something that I think we all agree we need to invest in growing our STEM programs and professionals, but also we just need to invest in our next generations. I won't say much about it other than the fact that this dollar amount has nothing to do with the base funding. This is all to do with the 2020 audited operating loss. We continue to talk about COVID and how it's impacted so many different areas. But what I will tell you is that the Science Museum is doing everything that they can. They quickly transitioned into virtual options rather than going out to the schools like they normally do. And I think that they'll continue to do the very best. It's our job to come together to make sure that these amazing things in our state continue to stay available. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will pass it over to our testifiers. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Keeler. Ms. Brown, President of the Science Museum.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Allison Rumpel Brown, and I have the honor to serve as the President and CEO of the Science Museum of Minnesota. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. I'm also joined by Barry Gisser, our Chief Financial Officer, and John Severson, Director of Government Relations. And I'm here in support of House File 2285, which would provide vital financial support to the Science Museum of Minnesota and begin to change the financial trajectory of our beloved museum, institution, and statewide asset. And I really want to thank Representative Keeler, Chair Hansen, and the numerous members of this committee who co-authored this bill. So as we shared in our original testimony on January 14th, the financial impact of COVID-19 is significant for the Science Museum of Minnesota and all of our colleagues in the arts and culture sector, as we heard from John Frawley with the zoo. Despite these challenges, the Science Museum stayed focused on serving the community in many powerful ways, pivoting to deliver digital learning programs and experiences for parents, teachers, and students throughout Minnesota. Representative Keeler brought this bill because the Science Museum was facing significant financial challenges due to the pandemic. The museum started in March of 2020 with 499 employees. We're now down over 50% to about 250 employees due to the pandemic. So even after significant expense reductions and other costs, we project an operating loss of at least $15 million over the 2-year period starting last March 2020, so about a year ago, continuing to March 2022 due to the pandemic's direct and indirect impact. The Science Museum did receive a PPP loan of $4.5 million through the CARES Act, only a portion of which will be forgivable. We subsequently received a $2 million PPP2 loan through Consolidated Appropriations Act. And although the museum work included in the shuttered venues portion of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, the museum did not meet the eligibility requirements. There have been revisions to the bill, but we are exploring those. But at this point, we don't think we will receive any access through that funding. We are grateful for the BPP loans we've received. There are still significant unknowns regarding the federal relief packages passed in December 2020 and March of this year. And while we do know there's not a single source of relief that will make our organization whole, we also know the passage of this appropriation would be a major step forward in righting our financial ship. Our financial reserves are limited and greatly depleted as we weathered closures throughout most of this past year. With a greatly reduced staff, we navigated our way through this crisis using a balance of reserves, prior state funding, PPP loans, and working tirelessly to retain and attract philanthropic support from corporate foundation and private donors. Before the close of our 2020 fiscal year, we filed a business interruption claim with our insurance provider in the amount of $3,798,000, $3,798,000, the amount cited in House File 2285. The insurance provider ultimately denied the claim. To share more on the claim and the museum's financial position, I will turn it over to the museum's Chief Financial Officer, Barry Gisser. Thank you.
Mr. Gisser, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Allison. For the record, my name is Barry Gisser, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer. Prudent financial management of the museum and ensuring its long-term sustainability are my top priorities. And to that end, we made some incredibly difficult decisions over the last year. As Allison mentioned, the financial impact of the pandemic has been significant. We expect the impact to be nearly $35 million of revenue and a $15 million operating loss. And that loss is after reducing headcount by 50% and expenses by $20 million. We are grateful for the aid provided by the 3 major federal stimulus programs, and we continue to evaluate the impact of the March 2021 American Rescue Plan Act. However, to offset the loss, the museum is now using reserves earmarked not just for short-term emergencies such as the pandemic, but also reserves set aside for investing in the museum's future. To help offset the losses during the initial closure, as Allison mentioned, the museum submitted a business interruption insurance claim in the amount of $3.8 million, the same amount included in House File 2285. This claim was denied by our carrier, who determined none of the executive orders led to any loss, damage, or prohibition of access to the insured premises. Next, the carrier determined losses were unrelated to any insured operation of the museum. Additional funding will provide vital cash flow to bring back resources necessary to relaunch both in-person and digital science programming for all Minnesotans. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to join you today. And at this time, we would welcome questions.
Representative Becker-Finn and then Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Keeler. I don't think we could have found a better author for this bill in your enthusiasm for the Science Museum. My family has also, we've historically been members of the Science Museum, and I think to what the last testifier spoke to, you know, it wasn't necessarily any order that kept my family from going to the Science Museum over the past year. It was wanting to make sure my family was safe, and, you know, wanting to make sure that I wasn't exposing my kids to a disease that shut down a lot of things across our planet in the last year. And so totally support the Science Museum, and I think they play a really critical role too. And I think especially in the work in some of the exhibits that Representative Keeler touched on, particularly related to our Indigenous population, as well as their exhibits on race and other issues, you know, there's really an opportunity, and they really are on the forefront of having, bringing those issues forward in a way that's really palatable and understandable to the average Minnesotan when they visit the Science Museum. So I think this is incredibly important, and would hate for this one kind of really bad year to impact this great resource for our entire state on a long-term basis. And I will also give them a shout out. They're very good at attempting to get as many members back as possible. Right now, I just saw if I renew, I get free pollinator seeds. So I guess they know their audience, and really supportive of this bill. I'm glad that we're discussing it today.
Ms. Brown, any response?
Chair, members, thank you. And we wish to welcome you back, and we will also be out within the community and around the state. And we thank you for your support and consideration.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Representative Keeler, for this bill. This is a great bill. I don't have children, but I also go to the Science Museum, and I think it's a really great example of not just children can learn and have fun, but a lot of adults can too. I know I have even taken my parents there as something to do when they're in town. So if you need something to do, it's always a great place to go. My question is actually about the new Quetzalcoatl statue. Can you tell me about it? I guess my number one question is, does it have feathers? And can you talk a little bit about what families can see and what has been done to keep, some of the scientific inquiry alive over the past year? I know the Science Museum's had to be really nimble and has adapted to a lot of classrooms, but I really want to hear a lot about this dinosaur.
Ms. Brown.
Chair and members, representatives, it's a great question. You pronounce that very well. I'm not going to repeat it because I can't pronounce it, especially when we have our paleontologist in the room. I really did a terrible job at our all staff meeting. For those who don't know, Quetzalcoatlus is a very tall, it's not even a dinosaur, it's a flying reptile. I also called it the wrong thing one time. And we have a model of them, two of them in our facility, one standing. It's, I don't know, 30 or feet tall or so, and one's flying. We had to bring them in on cranes into our space. We also brought other dinosaur specimens out. Feathers don't fossilize well. There are imprints of feathers, but and so he worked with a place that built it, and now I'm beyond my science about it and how it. We don't know the color of them, but they can look back at today's specimens and then go back to the record and make good scientific guesses on what they look like. And so you should come see it, see what it looks like. You actually look online and see pictures of them and learn about them. And now you're way past my science understanding. But there's
Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's a really great example of how we really grow inquiry, and just wondering about what color a dinosaur was is something that really inspires our school children. They learn that from their teachers, and that's, I think, that it's hard to put a value on curiosity and inspiration, but I think that's really what this is about. And I think Representative Keeler in her introduction really talked about what that meant for her family and what that means for school children and scientists, aspiring scientists and amateur scientists across Minnesota. So I think this is a great bill. I think the Science Museum is something critical for our state, and I'm really glad that we can support it in this committee.
Thank you. We also put things online about this because we know people not everybody can come to the museum. So we have online activities as well and digital activities around it.
Members might be searching right now, but we do have a couple more questions. Representative Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say that I really enjoy visiting the Science Museum, and I always have. And I know that you've been very generous in offering us a chance to view, I think it was the World War II veterans IMAX early? That was amazing. And that was a snowstorm, but it was so worth it. I mean, it's just been amazing. And I love when you have OmniFest. And I'm glad that, when I'm here, I can just walk over and take a chance to look at this. But what I also love very much is that you have gelato when I'm done. Thank you very much. You don't find gelato a whole lot in Minnesota, and I just love it. But again, as I said earlier at the zoo, I don't know that we're going to have enough money to do everything that we should do. We've got a lot of, I've got businesses in my area which basically say I'm one chef away from closing my restaurant. We're not finding the people to come and work and do all that. We need to open up Minnesota. So I hope that, we can bring that message more and more to the governor that we just can't continue to do this, especially when we look at states around us and see how they've been being a little bit more open. I think we can do it. People know what they need to do to keep safe. And even though he's quarantining, he still knows that if you're in contact with somebody, you have to quarantine. And that's part of it. But I believe we all know we can do this safely. And I can't wait. I just can't wait. I just love it. So thank you very much. And I hope that we can help you out as much as we can. But that comes from getting money from our citizens. And my gosh, I hope we can do that soon.
Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, I think, for the bill author, but she may have someone else who may want to speak up. We've seen in a number of different bills that we've stuck very closely to the governor's recommendations. In this particular bill, we're almost double. I think that the fiscal impact here is 3.978 million. And I believe the governor's recommendations were just over 2 million. So could someone explain what's the difference here? Why is this bill almost twice as big as what the governor recommended?
Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Heinzman. Just to verify the verbal amendment is that it's 3.798. We had transposition in numbers. And so it's not a whole lot smaller, but just to make sure that for the record, we're talking about the same thing. And this number is the actual number of the audited operating loss. My guess is that the governor had an estimate in there, and we're taking the actual number in which they had loss in revenue due to the pandemic. I don't know if one of the testifiers wants to jump in as well.
Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members. Yes, that is the audited loss, and I don't know if that was a consideration in the governor's figure or not.
Representative Heinzman, the beauty is we are a separate and equal branch of government and can have different priorities than the executive branch.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Chair. With this many months under a current dictatorship in many people's minds, there's a lot of folks that don't agree. So it would be great to know why the governor's recommendation was lower and why he hasn't modified that, but I appreciate the opportunity to ask the question. Thank you.
I should caution Representative Heinzman, dictatorship is kind of a harsh assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your opinion, but that, of course, is the opinion of many Minnesotans, and I'm voicing their opinion. Thank you for the opportunity to do that.
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to double check that the House rules do apply to our discussions in committee as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
I wanted to circle back to Ms. Brown. There was about the insurance turning down the claim, and so and I'm assuming you've got good people making the claim and that claim being denied. Could you maybe? So they said that the executive orders didn't have a result in your laws. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair and members. May I turn this over to Barry Gisser, our Chief Financial Officer, to give some more background on that?
Mr. Gisser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. That is correct. We filed the business interruption claim in April of 2020, and the determination of the carrier, Chubb Limited, was that the primary purpose of the executive order issued by the governmental officials impacting your operations was to curtail the spread of the COVID-19 virus and had no impact on the business or the insured premises.
Interesting. Representative Keeler, any closing comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, for listening and engaging in this conversation. I know that we've learned a lot about the Science Museum this year, but I think it's just really important that we understand that we come together to make sure that these opportunities are here for all of the generations moving forward. And so I appreciate any consideration. Thank you.
Representative Keeler renews her motion House File 2285 as amended be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. The bill is laid over. Thank you. Vice Chair Wozlak, do you want to take over the gavel or the puck, so to speak?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will do that. Next on the agenda is House File 1733. Counties allowed to collect soil and water conservation district fees on deed transfer and mortgage registration and Clean Water Fund grant eligibility for counties established. Chair Hansen, would you like to move your bill?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would move that House File 1733 be recommended to be re-referred to the Taxes Committee.
And Chair Hansen, tell us about the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. You saw a version of this bill in the Clean Water Bill last week. Those of you who are on the Legacy Committee, I think you saw it again yesterday, losing track of which day is which. And then here it is today, and it will be going to the Taxes Committee with the agreement from this committee. Members, this is an attempt. It's this after 6 years of funding that has come from the Clean Water Fund for soil and water conservation districts. This is an attempt to help solve the funding problem without relying on clean water funds for local government aid. There are a number of written testifiers that had previously testified to the committee. You can find their documents in the on the committee webpage. And with that, I would open up for questions. We've discussed this previously, and it will be going to taxes.
All right. So there are folks available if members have questions. We'll open it up to that now if anyone has questions. Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, we've obviously had lots of conversations around the language in this bill, and we have a lot of concerns about a number of issues. Obviously, raising fees relative to housing is always a concern, and we've heard from a number of groups that have testified that this is also a problem simply because it takes the uniformity out of the fee structures. The problems around the instability of these fees as the market is up and down also creates difficulties for SWCDs. I see that there's numerous organizations that have written letters and continue to voice their concerns on this. I will give some kudos though to the chair and the bill author in that we are talking about SWCDs and how to better fund them. I think that deserves credit, and I want to mention that. I don't think this is the way to do it, but I appreciate the opportunity to reiterate some of the difficulties that we have in the language. And you know, at some point we will have an option. But my question today is more specifically, do we have yet a fiscal note associated with this bill, or is there a time when we could expect one?
Chair Hansen.
Madam Chair, I don't believe it has arrived yet. I know I asked for one, and hopefully, Representative Heinzman, the path would be it would leave here, go to taxes, and then come back. So I'm hoping that we will be getting a fiscal note shortly.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Representative Heinzman, any follow-up?
No, that's it.
Okay. Representative Tice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really appreciate the opportunity to say again, I really am so disappointed in this because I love my soil, water, and conservation district guys. I had a really nice conversation with mine yesterday, and they're all saying the same thing. We really would appreciate the extra funding, but this is not the way to do it. It's not an appropriate use of funds to do this, and it's going to cause extra costs and everything. So I'm very interested in seeing what the fiscal note will be. But when we talk about housing, it's going to be really hard to find housing, period. Once we're out of the pandemic and this action, we haven't caught up from the Great Recession yet. And right now things are not good. Granted, interest rates are low, but lumber is so high that a lot of folks are hearing from their builders for a contract that they signed a long time ago. Don't be surprised if your project runs $20,000 to $50,000 over. And where's that money going to come from? And now you're adding, maybe it's only $50, but I'll tell you what, it all adds up really fast. And I can tell you, this is going to be a deal breaker for a lot of homeless folks. It's going to be a lot of deal breakers for finding housing and building housing, because everything counts. Everything counts in housing. And this is not the way to do it. I love the fact that we really cherish our SWCDs, but this is absolutely blows my mind. I can't believe that we're doing this. And when I talked to them yesterday, they're all like, yeah, we are not for this whatsoever. How about if we just fund what we absolutely need to? Housing needs funding, big time, across the state, big time. And this is just ridiculous. I talked to Mayor Fabian today up in Roseau, and they are hurting bad. They are in danger of losing their industries up there. Flaris is looking to add 100 jobs and they can't find housing. And now we're adding another cost to it. It's just not going to work, folks. This is not going to work. This is horrible. And if we see it again, I'll say the same thing. It is just horrible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Representative Fisher, and then Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Representative Hansen, a couple of questions for you. Can you remind me again how much we are looking for in terms of the cost that would be on each permit? And then also, what are some of the supporters that we have out there right now? Are there groups that are supporting this?
Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Fisher, I would encourage you to take a look in the submitted testimony. I believe Conservation Minnesota supported this. I have had numerous conversations with people about 6 years of attempts, hundreds, if not thousands of hours trying to find a solution rather than using clean water funds, which Minnesotans voted for something special in 2008. Not something that was local government aid, but for something special. If you remember that kid jumping off the dock in the television commercials, that we were supposed to have something in addition, not as a replacement. In previous hearings, we've heard testimony about this being base funding. Clean Water Fund, Outdoor Heritage Fund, Parks and Trails Fund, Arts and Cultural History are not base funding. They're special every 2 years. Can't build a budget in the long run for them because they're supposed to be something special. So 2 years ago, we tried something and oh my gosh, can't do that. That was on the solid waste fee. And now we're hearing we can't do this. So I predict that any solution that is provided will have opposition to the status quo. Because as long as you're getting 100K a year, regardless of your size, regardless of your population, and regardless of your outcome, you're not going to want to change.
Representative Fisher, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, follow-up question. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to say thank you, Representative Hansen, for bringing the bill forward. You're right, no matter what we propose, there's going to be pushback. I've looked at some other funding sources also myself, and everyone's pushing back on it. I think that one of the best ways you're looking at right now is workable. I think the fee is very low and it's affordable. And part of the reason I tie back to that is that some of the soil and water conservation districts are doing projects that help developments occur out there by holding water back on the land. As we were hearing the other day, one of the problems we have is water is running off too quick. Development causes water to run off quicker. And so some of the districts are doing this kind of work. So to me, it makes sense that we start tying that back to some of the projects that are actually causing the problems out there. So thank you for your work, sir.
Representative Becker-Finn, and then we'll go to Representative Lewick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just wanted to say, if the businesses are already not able to find housing or it isn't being built, clearly it's a problem that's happening outside of anything that might happen in this bill involving $25 or $50. I think it's frankly not I think not very logical to think that an extra $25 or $50 fee in a project that's thousands and thousands of dollars is somehow going to result in more homelessness in our state. And I think, we can love all the programs all we want, but if we're going to have, propose a bunch of tax breaks and not come up with other ways to fund things, well, there's something's missing in between loving all the programs and loving the SWCDs and the work that they do, but then not being willing to fund them in a way that isn't violating what the legacy funds are supposed to be used for, as far as, the testimony we've heard before about, as referenced by Chair Hansen, as far as the base funding, it's not supposed to be coming from the Clean Water Fund. And so I applaud Representative Hansen for attempting another way of dealing with this and recognizing how important our SWCDs are. I've only been on the Environment Committee for 5 years, and I'm already sick of this, going round and round on how to fix this problem with funding the SWCDs and the work that they do. So glad to have this option out on the table, and just want to again make that point that I don't think this is not going to make or break the development of housing throughout this state. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Next up, I have Representative Lewick, and then we'll go to Representative Backer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question, can the bill author clarify or explain the route this mandated fee that the county would collect? Where does it go, and who has their hands on it before it might get to an SWCD? In other words, sometimes that can be problematic, and I'm not sure that's been really laid out in detail.
Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Representative Lewick, you could look at any of the 7-county metro area where they've had a $5 conservation fee in place for decades, where the fee is collected on closing, goes to the county, and then is distributed to the soil and water districts. And they seem to have been able to do it for many, many, many years.
Representative Lewick, did you have a follow-up question?
Well, yes, and a little bit of a comment. And that probably goes to the fact that those county commissioners each enjoy an election certificate, and they represent their constituents. And the way I understand this, if a county isn't coerced by this bill into levying that fee, then they're going to stand in danger of not being eligible for certain clean water funding in the future. And as one that did serve on the county board, not in the 7-county metro area, but out in another part of Minnesota, this is very cohesive, just absolutely dictatorial. I'll use that word. Sort of a got your arm behind your back, and if you don't do what we want, we're going to punish you. And frankly, that's just no way to treat our rural counties. And so I'll just, I know I'm beating an old drum here, but this is just the wrong way to do this. And you're going to do more damage to the relationship out there that we do have a strong relationship between the SWCDs and the county boards by trying to strong arm them into something like this. There are a lot of other election certificates out there besides yours and mine, Chair Hansen, but I just absolutely can't support this. Thank you.
And Representative Lewick, I would also point you to lines 1.13 to 1.19 of the bill. That talks a little bit more about where that fee goes and the specifics of the account if you wanted to look more into the specifics of that. Representative Backer, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Yeah, this is just a bad scenario. We had one of the members just say it won't make a big difference. Right now, in the 7-county metro area, one of the greatest challenges in the housing market right now is first-time home buyers. With what Met Council has done to raise the prices of land, and it's just absurd. And then we're adding this fee that has no relationships with a home. It's like what I said before. It's like driving a car and you're going to tax my shoes because I'm wearing shoes. If we go up to Moorhead, Fargo's larger than Moorhead. More people are building on the Fargo side than Moorhead side because of all the costs that we have here. And these first-time home buyers, we want young families to move into, stay in Minnesota, and the supply, the market supply of new homes, first-time homes, not your $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 homes, and so forth, is that's not for our first-time homebuyers. So what we're telling to these folks, and I'm just challenged when you have a rep saying it won't make a difference. It does make a difference. When you say that, you're not looking at reality. When people get started, it's hard with a family. It's hard to get started to buy a new home. And we have some people on this committee that's just unrealistic with that. Clean water, I was talking to a soil water conservation district at a meeting right before them. And here's point blank. We believe and we support clean water, money coming from clean water. That's what it was intended for, and so forth. They like that funding. And to say that they don't, is not correct. But my biggest concern right now is this doesn't relate to SWCD. We're gouging these poor people, and $50 is $50 when you're first time. I remember when I got started with my wife, there was times that I barely could come up with $100 in a month and so forth. So I just find that appalling when someone says it's not that big of a money, but it is for first time home buyers. Thank you, Madam Chair and members, for your time.
Madam Chair.
Representative Hansen.
Yeah, I think, Representative Backer, I think you were close to a good analogy, and the analogy would be the wheelage tax because of road costs. And so the legislature had allowed counties to impose a wheelage tax. And first it was, I think, in the metro area, but now it's pretty broad. So the option of providing a wheelage tax to provide for the costs for roads. So when you buy land, whether it's for your house or your farm or your business, what we're asking here is that there is or what we're recognizing here is that there is a cost. There's a cost for soil and water protection. And that cost of $25 when you close is not inappropriate because it's tied to land, and what happens on the land affects the water. So that's the purpose for it.
And I will just chime in here as somebody who was recently a first-time home buyer, that a $50 fee, I won't speak for everyone, but I will speak for myself as an actual first-time home buyer and not a theoretical, hypothetical situation, that a $50 fee wouldn't have stopped me from buying a home. There were lots of other factors that would have prevented me from doing that, but certainly not a fee that was going to these soil and water conservation districts. Representative Jordan.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I was also going to speak as a recent first-time home buyer. I purchased a condo about 1.5 years ago. The thing that kept me out of the housing market actually was staggering student debt. So I think there's a number of factors that really impact the ability of people to start a home. The thing that has, again, prevented my partner and I from, it took us a longer time than it took our parents to buy their first home, and it's because of our student debt. It's prevented us from having children. So there's a number of factors. But I will say one of the things that mattered for me when I was a new home buyer, as a first-time home buyer, was also proximity to having clean air and clean water, and making sure that we lived in a good place. We wanted to make sure that we had clean drinking water, and we wanted to have people who were adequately funded to protect our land that we had just invested in. And I know that's what a lot of my constituents, and I represent one of the hottest housing markets in the state. So I think it's interesting that a lot of people seem to think that people are fleeing Minneapolis, but no, the homes are selling. There is not enough homes that people can sell. So it's not like this is going to be preventing or staggering a home market. In fact, it's really not the case. And I think as many people who are involved in real estate know, there are a number of factors and closing costs that go into it, and people are saving quite a bit of money to be able to do that. So I really think that this is not an accurate argument for what we're getting at here, which is to fund our soil and water conservation districts. And I really can tell you, as someone who recently purchased my first home, that was not a factor at all. And I think when I was going through all of those closing fees and aspects at the end, to see a fee to make sure that the land that I was buying and putting an investment in was going to be protected would have been an asset for me. I want to make sure that my investment pays off. And I know that my constituents who are purchasing homes for the first time in my district feel the same way.
Representative Eklund.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll repeat what I said the last time this came in front of the committee. The clean water funds will be running out in 12 years. That's a short amount of time in political speak. I applaud Chair Hansen for bringing this forward. It is at least an option to look at. I'll make a comment on one of my colleagues talking about the area where Mayor Fabian, former Representative Fabian's at. I lived over there 35 years ago. The housing market hasn't gotten any better in 35 years. When I lived over there, my wife and I had trouble finding a place to rent. We finally did, but it was tough. So this is nothing new for that area of the state or any area of the state. And I do not see where a $25 fee is going to have any effect on somebody that's closing on a house, whether it's $20,000 or $100,000 or a $300,000 house. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I almost didn't comment on this, but there's been something that's been bothering me from this time. And I said, this is like Groundhog Day for me, because I'm pretty sure this is the third time I've heard this bill in just a few days, and it just keeps coming back. But first of all, the fact that we're going after this money in the real estate business is just such a stretch. It's just such a stretch as to where this money's coming from. It's like we're just picking an area and saying, let's just grab the money from here. But the real issue is, you talk about the people that voted for the Clean Water Fund, and out of all the things that legacy money goes for, I think that this is the one that would be a genuine ask. I think the way it was worded on the ballot was basically, do you want clean water? And so to say that you don't like the way that some entity is spending the Clean Water Fund and the people wouldn't like that, I just don't agree with that. The SWCDs do a good job, and I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of that, but we're using the money for clean water. And whether or not it runs out in 2032, which I hope it will end, and then we'll find another funding source at that time, it's still going for clean water. And that is what the people voted for. So to pick it apart and say you don't like the way this money's being spent or where this money's going doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's clean water, it's clean water. So I do not like this bill. I think it's just wrong in so many ways. So.
Okay, any other member questions? I don't see any hands raised at the moment. So we'll go back to Chair Hansen for closing remarks.
Patiently waiting for 6 years for any other proposal. This is tied to land. It is workable. There's precedent, multiple ways. I would ask for your support to move this to the Tax Committee.
Representative Hansen renews his motion that House File 1733 be recommended to be re-referred to the Taxes Committee. The clerk will take the roll.
Hansen, Rick.
Aye.
Hansen, aye. Wozlowick, Amy.
Wozlowick, aye.
Wozlowick, aye. Heinzeman, Josh.
No.
Heinzeman, no. Acom, Patty.
Aye.
Acom, aye. Ackland, Susan.
No.
Ackland, no. Backer, Jeff.
Backer votes no.
Backer, no. Becker, Finn, Jamie.
Aye.
Becker, Finn, aye. Eklund, Rob.
Aye.
Eklund, aye. Fisher, Peter.
Fisher, aye.
Fisher, aye. Green, Steve.
No.
Green, no. I go Spencer. I go Spencer. Jordan, Sydney.
Aye.
Jordan, aye. Keeler, Heather.
Keeler, aye.
Keeler, aye. Lee, Fu.
Lee, aye.
Lee, aye. Lippert, Tan.
Lippert, aye.
Lippert, aye. Lewick, Dale.
Lewick, no.
Lewick, no. Morrison, Kelly.
Morrison, aye.
Morrison, aye. Nelson, Nathan.
Nelson, no.
Nelson, no. Tice, Tama. Tice, Tama. I go Spencer. I go Spencer. One more time, Tice, Tama. Right, that is 11 ayes and 6 noes.
The motion prevails and the bill is on its way to taxes. With that, I will turn the gavel back over to Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wozlawik. We have House File 1586, Representative Torkelson. Another option, Soil and Water Conservation Districts and Watershed District Merger Feasibility Study and money appropriated. Representative Torkelson, welcome to the committee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be back in the Environment Committee. I kind of miss you guys sometimes.
Let me move your bill so it's in front of us. So I will move
Please
that
do.
House File 1586 be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. Representative Torkelson.
Thank you. House File 1586 is a feasibility study bill regarding the possible merger of soil and water conservation districts and watershed districts. It would be a voluntary merger. The dollar amount is blank because I'm not sure how much it would take to do a study. I'm certainly willing to do some more digging on that should this bill develop support. It'd be limited to soil and water conservation districts and watershed districts that have already gone through the one watershed, one plan process. There is a map of those in your packets today. A number of watershed districts across the state have gone through the process and do have approved plans in place. So the two organizations do a lot of similar work, not identical, but they do a lot of similar work, but they are structured dramatically differently. A watershed district, of course, is based on watershed boundaries, and soil and water conservation districts are based on county boundaries. That means that they are sometimes working not at cross purposes, but in different jurisdictions at the same time, causing some consternation on that regard. As you know, water doesn't follow county borders. The idea is complicated. I don't have an answer in mind to the question at this point. I just know the question really does need to be asked. There's also a major difference in jurisdiction and structure between watershed districts and SWCDs. I'm sure you're all aware of this, but SWCDs have elected supervisors that have no levy authority, whereas watershed districts have unelected supervisors that do have levy authority. I'm not a big supporter of levy authority, don't get me wrong, but it is a dramatic difference between the two organizations that are dealing with many of the same issues and on the same territory, same state of Minnesota. So it's a thought here that we would actually sit down with people that have expertise and interest in this area and evaluate the landscape. You know, we depend on soil and water conservation district employees and watershed district employees to do the on-the-ground work that we all want to see done. I was listening in for most of your discussion on the previous bill, and it just amazes me that the state of Minnesota can't figure out how to fund soil and water conservation districts, that out of a $50 billion budget, we can't find the money for the state's commitment to soil and water conservation districts. At the same time, it surprises me that there are some counties that also can't seem to step up to the plate and find resources within their county to properly fund soil and water conservation districts. The landscape is uneven. If you look across the state, there are some districts where dramatic work is being done in a great fashion and with great relationship with landowners, and that is the key to success in my mind, having an on-the-ground solid relationship with landowners so you get that cooperation that is absolutely necessary for successful projects on the ground. At the same time, we've seen some counties where support for their SWCD is limited and suspicious, I guess might be a proper term. But also when it comes to watershed districts, we've seen some great success. Some really great projects have been done by watershed districts. On the other hand, we've seen some real controversy too. You may remember recently a watershed district that decided to spend $2 million building a new building. Now that may have been an appropriate use of their levy authority. I I don't know. I wasn't involved in the project, but I know it did create a lot of consternation in that particular district. So the bill before you really asks the question, doesn't have the answer, but I think it's a question worth asking, and it'd be worth making a small investment in studying this issue with the proper people involved. With that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions. I did not bring any testifiers with me. I don't know if others have signed up to testify or not.
There are a couple testifiers from the soil and water districts and the watershed districts. So I know we've got some questions and we are running close on time. I want to make sure we give the testifiers their option of testifying. So Ms. Javins and Ms. Buck, quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Emily Javins, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Association of Watershed Districts. And thank you, Representative Torkelson, for bringing to the attention that there are some governance and financing issues that exist. And the SWCDs, yes, I think we're all aware about the funding problems there. We do at the watershed districts. It's kind of amazing that we have been capped at our levy for 20 years and haven't been able to give us an increase in the ability to even generate revenue. And no one will even put their name on the bill. So 20 years we've had to operate under the same budget. But there's some governance issues that have come up too, some true growing pains of the One Watershed, One Plan. And some really great things that have happened with One Watershed, One Plan too. We're definitely moving in the right direction of how we manage water. That should definitely be done on a watershed scale. We have some great, there's some great partnerships already with SWCDs and WDs. I would just ask a couple of things. We would love to sit down over the summer, and we would do it for free to just take a look at what are the biggest questions we need to take a look at. And would there be a couple of different things we would want to review or whatnot? So would love to just have a little bit further conversation, get the right questions asked. And then if we do a study, I guess I would ask if we could maybe find a more independent reviewer. The Bowser is our partner. And I think maybe someone with a little bit more objective or not so close to us would maybe perhaps be a better person or entity to do the study. So thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Hansen.
Ms. Buck.
Sure, welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Leanne Buck. I'm the Executive Director for the Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. So, and first and foremost, also, I want to say thank you to Representative Torkelson for bringing forward the bill. Our association does not have, I'll get cut to the chase. We don't have any policy pertaining to the legislation, and we're neutral on this study. So we do see what I would call, we do see different niche than the watershed districts, but because of our association working with watershed districts and the counties, I do want to highlight that we do see, we've been proactive in being the push to change and to do the One Watershed, One Plan on a watershed scale. And so what we see that is, it has come to reducing the number of plans. We're using more of the available science and expertise. We're continuing to do collaboration, and we're continuing what I would say accelerate each other's roles and responsibilities locally. So I just want to reemphasize, you've referenced already the governance component of it, and for soil and water districts for statewide. The one thing I do want to just highlight and leverage that I think is the bonus and the niche of soil and water districts is we tend to be more on the private lands conservation. We tend to be smaller projects, and we one-on-one with the landowner. So where other entities may look at larger scales, larger operations, and or a regulatory or permitting mechanism, we do not have those authorities within our statute. So citizens do like an entity that they can go to for those voluntary practices.
Okay.
I guess, and the last but not least, I just want to reference one other thing that I think is very important is our relationship with counties. But we also, one thing, majority of our districts are co-located with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. So our citizen boards aren't only there to help govern the local soil and water districts, but they also provide those locally led resources that can help with priorities with our federal government and the USDA Farm Bill programs. So with that, look forward to future discussions, and thank you, Representative Hansen.
Representative Acom, then Representative Fisher, then Representative Backer, and then Representative Luick in 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Torkelson, for bringing this idea forward. I think especially after One Watershed, One Plan, where different jurisdictions were working together for the common betterment. And so I think this is a really interesting idea. I have a question in that, do you know, are there any places around the state where this is happening informally already?
To my estimation, no. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To my estimation, no, they're not.
Senator Acom.
Thank you. That's it. I think it's an interesting idea that we should look at.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to Representative Torkelson, thank you for bringing this forward. I know that we've talked a lot in the subcommittee on water on ways that we can have better governance and how we take care of addressing water as it comes across our lands. I think the proposal you're putting out there has merit and is a great way to start looking at the way to streamline how we can do government more effectively and bring together maybe some other ways that we can use to bring funding in that has accountability to it. I agree with you. I've always been somewhat bothered is the elected officials don't have the opportunity to raise the levies, and at the same time, the appointed officials do have the opportunity to raise levies. So I appreciate you seeing that, bringing it out, and I am supportive of what you're trying to do. Thank you.
Representative Backer.
Yeah, thank you. I respect the author of the bill, but some of the things I've heard, and I'd like to talk to the author about this more, is one of the things I've heard from a watershed district's perspective is it's one of the last things that we really have local control. As we know, water in southern Minnesota, water up on the Iron Range and west central Minnesota doesn't flow, they all flow, but there's different lay of the land that affects how water is. In my neck of the woods, I can see someone walking away 3 miles. We're so dang flat and so forth. One of the concerns I've heard from board members is if this goes under soil water conservation district, eventually with the one watershed concept, which a lot of my folks out there don't care for, this really will eventually get control under Bowser and no more local control. That's the concerns that I've heard from my water districts and even some of the SWCD folks. So that's my 2 cents. And on this, I do appreciate that. Thank you, everybody.
Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and ideas. This is something I hope we can move forward with. To Representative Backer, local control is the last thing I would want to damage in any way. I think we need more local control, not less. That's how we actually get work done, is when local folks have input. Once again, we've gone to a watershed-based approach with testing and planning. A watershed-based structure for governance might also be something worth looking at. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for hearing the bill.
Got one more, Representative Torkelson. Representative Luick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate what the author's trying to do here, but I guess I'm a little concerned that the way this bill is written, it's too suggestive of an outcome. And there was earlier comment about this looks like a opportunity for Bowser to work on a study that would certainly benefit, at least in the big picture, increase their funding, increase their authority. And the reason I say that, I'll give you an example of what one of our counties up in my district face. Aiken County is part of 5 watershed districts. 2 of them are already in the One Watershed, One Plan. The other 3 aren't. The bulk of those watersheds are Mississippi watersheds. There's one piece that's actually St. Louis watershed. So that goes to Lake Superior. The other one goes to Gulf of Mexico. Those counties up there work extremely well in something called the Mississippi Headwaters Board, which they bootstrap up and you get a little funding from the state, but most of the real Norwegian steam that makes that run is coming right out of the county's pockets. Plus, we've got the U.S. Corps of Engineers in the middle of everything we do. So what I would suggest to the bill author would be to modify this bill and take a global look. and get a third party to do it. And so that Bowser's not right in the middle of this. Bowser is one of the people that's would be looked at, because I think this is the way the bill is written right now. It's too suggestive of a desired outcome, and that is not the way to study things, as far as I'm concerned. Let's leave the answer to the question completely unfettered, and let's again, I'd like to work with the bill author here, but I can't support this as it's written because it just looks too suggestive, and lets Bowser be in a position to certainly, I'm not saying they would do this intensely, but you know, when you get to write the outcome, or you contract for the outcome, you do have contracting authority, and that can be a big deal. So I appreciate what the author's trying to do here, but again, I don't think this is enough. We need to take a global look, not suggest an outcome, but take a global look. And my county is a good example of the multitude of areas that single county board deals with every month. They got people running around involved in all of those literally daily. But we're ready to the author on this, but this is too narrow, too focused, and too suggestive of an outcome.
Representative Torkelson, I have a question for you. You're aware that there are WMOs and unique joint powers boards that deal with water as well. I think in my county, there's the Vermilion River Watershed Joint Powers Board, and I think the Area 2 Joint Powers Board out by you. Are you open to including them in this evaluation?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm absolutely open to that. And I do concur with Representative Lueck. Actually, I've had other comments along those lines. And I would honestly think if this would move forward, we'd look for a more independent resource for coordinating the study.
Members, the last major reorganization of state government was in the late 80s when the Board of Water and Soil Resources was created. We've changed the names of agencies, we've moved things around, but Bowser being created in the late 80s was the last major reform. That's over 30 years ago. Over 10 years ago, we had a legislative audit on Board of Water and Soil Resources, and specifically watershed districts and soil water districts. And at that time, we found that many of them didn't even have a web page, and that we created essentially a coaching program used to help those districts that were flagging, whether they were watershed districts or soil and water districts. You all should have received a report on that, because that program, that coaching program called PRAP, is still occurring, trying to bring districts that are having difficulty up to some operational sense. So it's time again to take another step on this journey. And so I appreciate Representative Torkelson taking the initiative on this. And there's more to go, because as we mentioned in the previous discussion, Minnesotans voted for clean water, and we're going to have to show some outcomes for all this money that's being spent. I renew my motion that Representative Torkelson's bill be laid over for possible inclusion, House File 1586 for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. The bill is laid over. And with that, members, we will see you tomorrow. We are adjourned.